This has been an idea that Carol Gilligan and Pedro Noguera and I have been talking about for about 2 years, 3 years actually, longer than that. And it is so extraordinary that it has come to fruition. The people in this room, you don't know this yet, but the group of you together, and you'll see this in the bios, are just an incredible group of people who have so much to share with each other and so much to offer in terms of the conversation we want to have in this group. We are looking for what we would call thick and deep conversation about the crisis that we face as a culture. And when I say culture, we'll talk lots about what we mean by culture. As evident in the massacres in Nairobi, Kenya, or in the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C., or the rape of young girls in Ohio, in which the Twitter feed about the rape was not about the atrocity of the crime, but the sluttiness of the girls. We face a deep and profound crisis of connection. While our lifespan is increasing, the quality of life is declining as we become more isolated, distrustful, disconnected, and fractured as individuals, and as a society, both home and globally. A recent national survey in the States indicates that one out of every 3 adults in the US over the age of 45 now report feeling lonely, whereas only 1 out of every 5 adults reported feeling lonely 10 years ago. With, interestingly, single men more likely to report feeling lonely than single women, and married women more likely to report feeling lonely than married men. The American Sociological Review reports that the percentage of adults who report having no close friends has increased from 36% in 1985 to 53.4% by 2004. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention in the US indicates that the suicide rates among middle-aged people are soaring, especially since 2000, with the rates increasing 30% for men between the ages of 35 and 50, and 50% for men in their 50s. There's a 60% increase over the past decade in suicide among women in their 60s. More people in the US now die of suicide than car accidents. Other dire statistics that underscore our crisis of connection include that half of the children in this rich country of ours live at or near the poverty level, and the number hasn't budged much over the past few decades, and 70% of those living at or near poverty are women and children. Income inequality, as all of you know, has skyrocketed over the past 3 decades, and currently, another dire statistic, 40% of black men in this country will have contact with it, will go through the criminal justice system at some point during their lives. While you look at the mass violence rates, we see an equally dismal picture. While mass violence, defined as the violence that kills at least 4 people, used to occur only a few times every decade in the early part of the 20th century in the States, the number started slowly rising in the 1970s and has hit an incredibly high level of increase since 2006. Since that time, only 7 years ago, there's been 36 incidents of mass violence in public settings and 221 incidents of mass violence overall in the United States in 2006. There is currently an incident of mass violence occurring at the rate of approximately 1 every 2 weeks in the States. So what is at the root of this crisis of connection? According to the human sciences, the story we are telling ourselves in the broader culture, and this is really the crux of PACH, the story we have been telling ourselves in the broader culture about who we are, what we know, and what we want and need most is out of sync with who we really are, what we really know, and what we really want and need most. In other words, we are telling ourselves a false story about ourselves, and this story is undermining our common humanity and thus causing this crisis. The damage we do to ourselves when we tell stories we know are not true first became evident in the work on girls and women that Carol began in the 1970s, and she'll talk about it on the panel. It's also become apparent in research with boys. Boys' stories starkly reveal how our false stories about them hurt them, and in some cases kill them. Let me give you an example from my own work of how this works. My research with boys over the past 20 years finds that when you ask boys, and I'm talking about boys in the States, to describe their friendships during early and middle adolescence, this is what they sound like. At 15, Malcolm says, "My best friend and I love each other, that's it. You have this thing that is deep, so deep it's within you, you can't explain it. It's just a thing that you know that that person is that person, and that is all that should be important in our friendship. I guess in life, sometimes two people can really, really understand each other and really have a trust, respect, and love for each other. It just happens. It's human nature. Or they sound like Antonio at age 14, when he says, "My ideal best friend is a close friend who I could say anything to, because sometimes you need to spill your heart out to somebody, and if there's nobody there, you're going to keep it inside, and then you'll have anger. So you need somebody to talk to always." Rather than sounding like gender stereotypes, boys' stories reveal a deep capacity and desire to love, to be loved, to think, to feel, to self-reflect, to communicate, to have close relationships, and to care about others. They reveal, in other words, the essence of being human. Yet something changes in their stories as they grow older, and the demands of the larger cultural expectations and roles and masculinity, about messages about masculinity and expectations about manhood become more imposing. When you ask the same boys in my studies about their friendships during late adolescence, their willingness to tell us what they feel and know has diminished, and they start to claim not to care any longer and assert that to care is, quote, girly and gay, and thus lame. My research and the research of others indicate that as boys grow up, and here, of course, for all you boy researchers in the room, I'm homogenizing all boys to make a larger point. They disconnect from their own humanity, picking up the homophobic and sexist themes in our culture, and they infiltrate it into their narrative about who they are. They no longer speak about their desire to love and be loved. They no longer reveal their human capacity to feel, to care, to self-reflect, and to engage in close relationships. I did not say they no longer have that. I said they no longer are willing to reveal it. Boys' stories suggest that when boys grow older and begin to believe that the stories we tell them about themselves, they disconnect from their knowledge that, quote, sometimes you need to spill your heart out to somebody, and if there's nobody there, then you're going to keep it inside, then you'll have anger, so you need somebody to talk to always. And right at this time in boys' development, the time that boys begin to go underground with their knowledge of the human world, the suicide rate for boys shoots up in the US to become 5 times the rate of girls, although girls always have a higher rate for attempting suicide. And I have no interest in pitting the two against, but the suicide rate among boys shoots up then. In other words, false stories perpetuated in our culture have very real consequences. From neuroscience and biology to developmental psychology and evolutionary anthropology, our cultural story about what it means to be human and what predicts our ability to thrive are being exposed as false, as scientists reveal that humans are by nature empathic, cooperative, and social beings. We want and need close relationships to thrive, and our capacity for mutual understanding is critical to the survival of our species. Caring, feeling, wanting intimate relationships, including intimate friendships, is not only a girl or a gay thing, it's a human thing, and it's essential for our ability to lead just and humane lives. Yet we live in a culture, as all of you know, because you all write about it and do work about it, both locally and globally, that privileges autonomy or self-sufficiency over relationships, the self over community, and the individual interests over the common good. We measure success only in economic terms and not in social-emotional terms. Our definitions of maturity and masculinity, which at this point in our very hyper-masculine culture is one and the same, emphasizes independence and stoicism and downplays the importance of having and maintaining high-quality relationships. Our binaries and stereotypes about gender, race, sexuality, religion, social class disconnect and divide us, leading us away from our common humanity and constraining our relationships by impeding our ability for mutual understanding. In other words, what girls and boys reveal, as do the sciences and the arts, is that we have within ourselves the potential to create a thriving, just, and humane society. Yet we live in a society that perpetuates false stories of who we are and what we want, and devalues or ignores the very qualities and experiences that we need to solve our collective problems. The aim of PACH is to bring together the researchers, practitioners, journalists, activists, and artists whose work reveals the inaccuracies of our widely held stereotypes, assumptions, binaries, and offers an alternative story based on what we really know about girls, boys, men, women, Black people, Asian people, Latino people, gay people, poor people, immigrants, and so on. Yet we can't move forward unless we share what we have learned and see for ourselves the convergence in our work and the possibilities of genuine and deep transformation. The soil in the ecotone, according to my landscape architect sister, Thaisa, is the area where two ecosystems meet, such as where the forest meets the prairie or the beach meets the woods, and is the richest in nutrients and most resilient, yet it's often neglected. PACH aims to dwell in the ecotone, where journalists and activists meet researchers meet artists, practitioners meet policymakers, and educators meet philanthropists, so that we can see how our collective work allows us to see the hand in front of our face and provides a path for taking action. If we stay isolated in our own ecosystems, we fail to understand that we believe it is through this convergence that we create possibilities of having what we know to be true be in sync with the stories we tell our children, where we can speak what we feel and feel what we know, and where we recognize our common humanity, and that becomes the springboard for radical change in the way we work, play, educate and raise our children, have relationships, and live our lives. Living in the ecotone of PACH, we hope by the end of the year to offer concrete recommendations for the next steps in creating a world in which we actually want to live.
I guess we should start this conversation. I know I'm ready to do so. I'll start with Carol. Niobe in her remarks referred to a crisis of connection. And you've done an extraordinary amount of work over the last decades focusing on girls, but really had a major impact. And I wanted to ask you, from your perspective and your understanding, what do you see as the root of this crisis of connection that we're seeing as exhibited by the Naval Yard shootings or the mall attack in Nairobi or the shootings in Chicago recently? All these things happened within the past week. I've just been struck at one could easily say the world's falling apart, but there seems to be, just in my mind, certain linkages between what we're seeing in these types of incidents.
So Jimmy, you've really set me up. I mean, first of all, you said I've done this work on girls, but would I speak as an expert on male violence? And then my husband, who is the expert on male violence, is right here in this room, so it's totally bizarre. But it's perfect. But I'm really the action person here, in the sense that my last book, Joining the Resistance, ends with the sentence, "The time to act is now." And I deeply believe it. So I want to talk about why I'm here, why I'm in PACH, why I'm really excited that I'm here with all of you in this room, and that we're going to have this conversation. The big theme of my work, and it started even before the girls' work, where I did work, which has been, the girls' work somehow has eclipsed it, but I actually started by listening to women and showing how women's voices were essential to transforming the conversation. That was In a Different Voice. It was a book about the importance of women's voices being part of the human conversation. And increasingly, in a sort of an ironic phrase for me, the phrase, knowing what we know, like knowing that women are humans, and then the radical discovery of Niobe's work, which was the deep secret of her book, is that boys are humans. And I mean, and frankly, this amazing convergence of evidence, of knowledge across the human sciences that has, as to what it in fact means to be human, and who we are as humans. And then I think the story of how we come not to know what we know, or how we lose our common humanity. And that's, I think, what creates the crisis of connection. I use the phrase crisis of connection, though, in the girls' work to describe something very specific. And it was something that I started hearing literally from girls in a variety of settings. In after-school programs in Boston and Cambridge, and girls were saying, because they took for granted up until adolescence that we live in connection with others. In a sense, who doesn't know this? We are in fact interdependent, our lives are. And girls would come to a point as they were reaching adolescence where they said, and I'll quote, "If I were to say what I'm feeling and thinking, no one would want to be with me. My voice would be too loud," and you can add all the other 2 words. Too much, too angry, too loud, too this, too bad, too selfish, too something. And then this girl in particular added, "But you have to have relationships." And I said to her, "But if you're not saying what you're feeling and thinking, then where are you in these relationships?" She saw the paradox. She had given up relationship in order to have, quote, relationships, muting her voice so that, quote, she could be with other people. I mean, she saw it. It was psychologically incoherent, but it was very adaptive. She was the valedictorian of her high school class, and she was admitted to the first college that was her first choice, very competitive school. On the other hand, girls knew that if they weren't saying what they were feeling and thinking, they were not in relationship. But if they said what they were feeling and thinking, no one wanted to be with them. I said that was a crisis of connection. Either way, they were going to lose relationships. The girls in I ran writing and theater clubs for girls after school. We did women teaching girls, girls teaching women retreats in the Boston Public Schools, thanks to Wendy, and so forth. And girls were looking to women and saying, "Do you know about this?" And all too often, women looked away. And there was a sort of pact between women and girls, which was, if you don't say what you see me doing, I won't say what I see you doing. That we were making an adaptation that was in fact adaptive and that was psychologically incoherent, and it was a move out of connection. It was a crisis of connection. And how did you solve it? The phrases in our interview transcript as girls reach adolescence was, you could just chart it. You could do a quantitative study. I don't know, to cover what in fact girls do know. Mm-hmm. And it was when this work was joined then with Niobe's work on boys and Judy Chu's work on boys that was coming out this fall called When Boys Become, quote, boys. The parallel for boys was the statement that Niobe quotes in her book called I Don't Care, when in fact boys do care. So the sense that there is a convergence now of what we in fact know, and I think the question is, can we know what we know? So I feel the moment has come now where we can, coming together, there's a convergence of stories. Everyone is here because your work is part of this convergence. And I think what we first need is to really understand, to know this convergence, to know each other's stories, to listen to this, to really see deeply into the convergence, and then decide what's our next step. So I want to end by, so I feel very much the time to act is now.
So it's helpful to ground this conversation, I believe, in a recognition that there are moments when we do find a way to assert our common humanity. That's real. That's not an imagination. That actually does happen. And I'm going to give you 3 concrete examples. 1989, Loma Prieta earthquake in the Bay Area. Giants playing the A's, if you're from the Bay Area, was very significant. Earthquake. And we find out, I'm actually driving to go pick up my daughter from preschool, find out that the Cypress freeway has collapsed, double-decker freeway. So steel and concrete have pinned hundreds of people into their cars. Now, if you know the Bay Area, this is the freeway that runs along the Bay Area, the Bay, San Francisco Bay. The only people living adjacent to the freeway were in housing projects in West Oakland. And they were the ones who scaled the freeway, climbed the freeway, and proceeded to free people who were pinned in their cars. About 100% of the people who lived in those housing projects were African American and poor. The people in those cars were all kinds of people. They didn't stop to ask who's in there, what religion, what race. They freed whoever was stuck. We saw something similar in 9/11 here. First example. Second example, also in the Bay Area. 5 high schools are struck with racial violence. And it's become so severe that the police are being deployed to these schools on a regular basis. Dozens of police officers, because these involve, in some cases, hundreds of kids. And the police keep saying to the schools, we cannot solve this problem for you. We cannot put enough policemen here to maintain peace for you. The school officials respond and say, we don't know what to do. I meet with some of the school officials. I said, have you talked to the kids yet? And they said, no. I said, well, why don't we find out what's going on with the kids? And start talking to the kids, and most of them, first of all, say that a lot of the problems start outside of school and work their way in. But then they also start talking about the conditions in their schools and how miserable they are. We decide that maybe the way to counter the violence that seems so intractable and so dangerous is to come up with campaigns at each school focused on what students can do to improve conditions in their schools. At Richmond High School, they decide that what they've got to work on is access to the bathroom. Because in the name of safety, the school has locked all the bathrooms. Now, as one who goes to the bathroom regularly throughout the day, I don't know how you get through the day without access to the bathroom, but they decided to organize a campaign all the way to the school board for access to the bathroom that brought together the groups that had previously been fighting. At Castlemont High School out in East Oakland, they decided that their interest was in getting a cafeteria. Because this is a school that had been in bungalows for years, and there was no place for children to eat. So they ate their burritos out in the rain when it rained. Point is, it was by looking at their common interest and working together in their common interest that they were able to both find a way to improve something very concrete in their schools, but also to eliminate the violence that the police and the school officials were clueless about. Third example, also from the Bay Area, where I lived for a long time, so I have lots of Bay Area stories.
And there's more humanity.
More humanity? I don't know. This is an alternative high school for kids who've been kicked out of the regular high schools. And a student there, known gang member, gang leader in fact, goes to his counselor and says, listen, tomorrow I'm coming to school as a girl. I'm no longer Malcolm. My name is Melody. And I want you to know because the people in my gang may try to come and get me. She's freaked out. She says, I need to tell the teachers. And the teachers get together and say, he can't come to school tomorrow because this will put all of us at risk. Word gets out to students in the school, and the students come and say, we will protect him. Students ride with him on the bus, take him in when he's kicked out of his parents' home, and they do this not once, they do this for the rest of the semester because they decide they will protect this member of their campus who was not exactly someone they liked before. I cite these examples because our common humanity is not just an abstract idea. It's something that actually happens in different moments. And we could go on and I could actually describe more. The real question is, what can we learn from these instances that would make it possible to imagine that they could be sustained and that they could even be replicated at a much larger level? I think, given this crisis that is so real, so profound, so scary in many ways, so intimidating and overwhelming that leads us to believe sometimes it's useless to think that we can even protect ourselves. Literally, the solutions they come to for the school shootings is that teachers should be armed. That's what they're thinking about in several states now. I think there's an alternative. And the alternative comes from understanding that we do have common interest. And our common interest occasionally are something that we can acknowledge and recognize. And so part of what I think I want to bring to this conversation is, how do we do that? How do we begin to sustain and create a space where this recognition of our common humanity is not just something that's a flash in the pan, but is actually a part of a larger project that begins to have a much bigger impact on our society and the world.